What we refer to as infectious disease isn't always a disease. It is maybe a natural, healthy cleansing. So this whole idea that all symptomatology is bad and must be suppressed at all costs has really done a lot of damage. Just because a person is exposed to something doesn't mean they're going to get sick. It depends on the strength and health of their body, their tissues, their immune system.
Welcome to the Alix Mayer Show. Today's guest, I want to call him a doctor of functional medicine because he's got so many degrees, but he's not. He's a doctor of acupuncture, he's a nutritionist, and he's an herbalist. And I'm talking about Dr. Michael Gaeta. He runs the Gaeta Institute in Boulder, Colorado, and you're going to love to hear what he has to say. His whole philosophy is herbs first, drugs last. We get into one of my favorite topics, which is rashes. You're also going to hear about the history of informed consent, which is really, really important in today's medical world. And you're also going to hear about antibodies and herd immunity and how the concept of herd immunity came about and what those antibodies that people always talk about really mean. So tune in, like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs to know this information for their health. It's very, very valuable information. So enjoy this episode today with Dr. Michael Gaeta. The Alix Mayer Show is sponsored by Mish International, gold and silver specialists since 1963. When you need protection from monetary inflation and leveraged assets exposure, you contact the dedicated people at Mish International. Mish International, a family business, offers true expertise, integrity, reliability, and fair pricing of gold and silver. Visit their website at mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com. Dr. Michael Gaeta, thank you so much for coming to the Alix Mayer Show today. It is my great pleasure to have you as my guest, and I cannot wait for our conversation.
Thanks, Alex. Great to be here.
So you are a highly credentialed doctor of acupuncture. That's not your only degree. I would call you just a functional medicine doctor, but I know you don't call yourself that. But I'm very impressed with your credentials and your wide-ranging grasp of all topics medical. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
My first career, I don't know if you can see it back there. There's a Steinway piano back there. That was my first career, was in music. When I grew up in New York City before moving to Colorado 17 years ago. And I love playing music for people. So I did that for a while, taught piano. I was a church organist and choir director, and realized that there was something more specific I wanted to do to help people. It wasn't quite satisfying me in terms of contribution and service, but also engaging my mind. So I ended up in school for massage therapy and studied nutrition and herbal medicine and acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine and functional medicine in different fields. And I'm very happy. And I still play my piano almost every day. But it was really a calling to do more specific work with people. I was actually originally a psychology major. I was going to be a clinical psychologist, and realized at that time I really didn't like being in school. I learned to love it. I spent many years in school, but at that time when I was 18, 19 years old, I couldn't see myself spending 10 years in school to get a doctorate. So I switched to music and then did that. And then switched into healthcare. So it's been a beautiful journey. So I'm kind of in my third career now of teaching primarily. I still practice and see patients on Tuesdays, but most of my time is spent with the school.
That's really exciting. So if I could say this, it's really your hands that brought you from music to then massage therapy, which brought you into medicine, which is a very interesting path.
That's very astute observation. That's actually how I tell the story sometimes, is I wanted to use my hands just in a different way between music and then the healing arts.
That's fantastic. So tell us a little about your practice, the Gaeta Institute. I know you have a show called Mondays with Michael, which I watched a lot of, and I just love your interviews. They're very in-depth and just right up my alley. Tell us about the Gaeta Institute. You've got a motto that I love.
Nature first, drugs last.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's important. I'm not down on pharma drugs. They're not bad. They're just ridiculously overused in the United States, especially. We have 4.2% of the population consuming 50% of the world's pharma drugs with the worst health outcomes of any developed country at the greatest expense. So we're spending the most and getting the least, and we're just a very highly over-medicated society. I always get a chuckle, Alex, when I hear about, and I have heard about this since, I was much younger, the war on drugs is absurd because we have a drug culture. It's just not necessarily recreational drugs, but pharma drugs is the drug culture we have. So nature first, drugs last doesn't exclude the need for pharma drugs, but it does acknowledge that anything a person might want to take a pharma drug for, which again there's a place for it, there's a natural solution, Alex, at least conservatively 95% of the time. So if you know what you're doing in the natural field or know how to take care of yourself or work with a practitioner, there's no need for pharma drugs if your body's working well. And if you're doing root cause resolution, you can avoid the need for them.
I agree with that. I always call it greening your medicine cabinet. And
right.
so,
nice.
Yeah, so you probably have like a top 5 or 10 list of things that you typically tell patients to have on hand so they can self-treat before they even have to call somebody like you. Yeah. What are some of your top recommendations that people wouldn't necessarily think about? What are the surprising things that people would really like to know?
Well, you mean for like getting sick? Oh, I feel like I'm getting sick, or I got hurt and I have pain. Yeah. Well, there's a 2-formula combination that I use of a Chondroplex and Andrographis complex from Standard Process that works beautifully for any infection anywhere in the body. Obviously, there's a place for drugs, but I think I've referred patients out for antibiotics in 36 years of practice twice, because and this is at least 20 years ago, so I know a lot more now. But those are 2 simple formulas that are just good to have sitting around. If somebody gets hurt, a teacher of mine used to call it boo-boo drink for the kids, which is calcium lactate in a little apple juice, is great for any type of injury or, trauma or something like that. Calcium really can help a lot with that. And then there's other pain formulas, chlorophyll complex, boswellia complex, turmeric forte, buckwheat and Cyruta plus. There's a lot of formulas that are kind of medicine chest ones, but I kind of lean on those first 2, the Chondroplex and Andrographis complex, at this first sign of getting sick. Usually we can knock it out before it becomes anything significant, and they move through it pretty quickly.
Wow, those are definitely not my first go-to. So thank you for that. That's exciting to have some new stuff. So let's talk about a controversial topic that I think you're probably equipped for. Let's talk about germs versus terrain. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question, Alex. Yeah, this was the bitter feud between Antoine Béchamp and Louis Pasteur in France over a century ago, close to 150 years ago. And Pasteur, one of the most corrupt so-called scientists in history, he would make Fauci proud. And he just was ruthless in stealing the work of other scientists and just stealing their work, making a name for himself, becoming the darling of the budding pharmaceutical industry at that time with his anthrax vaccine. And he built his career and his fortune on this germ theory, which says that if you have this disease, it's caused by that microbe. And supposedly, on his deathbed confession to his best friend who was with him at his bedside, he said in French, I guess, "The pathogen is nothing. The terrain is everything." And he died. I don't know if that's just like that. What happened, but that's how the story goes, where he finally confessed that he just lied to people. And the germ theory requires meeting the requirements of what we call Koch's postulates. Koch was a giant. He was like the granddaddy of microbiology and infectious disease at the time, and he came up with 4 or 5, depending on how what you read, requirements for causality. And at most, any pathogen with any disease meets one of them, meaning everybody who has the disease has that pathogen. Nobody who has that pathogen gets sick. You can isolate it in everybody who's sick, things like that. None of that is true. And so I'm in favor of the perspective of a contemporary of Pasteur, who is one of the greatest medical scientists of all time, Rudolf Virchow. And Virchow has on his resume discovered the phagocyte. So he was one of the first great microbiologists of his day in the late 1800s. And he had a wonderful quote, which I'll read to you. I just want to make sure I get it right. And he passed away around 1902. And he was, one of the giants of medical science that to this day, if you're studying cardiology or internal medicine, you learn Virchow's triad, which is a cardiology thing that's used diagnostically. But anyway, Virchow said this, and it's one of my favorite quotes. He said, "If I were to live my life over again, I would devote my life to proving that germs seek their natural habitat, diseased tissue, rather than being the cause of the diseased tissue. For example," he said, "mosquitoes seek stagnant water, but do not cause the water to become stagnant." So what he's saying there is a very elegant description of what we call terrain theory, which is that just because a person is exposed to something doesn't mean they're going to get sick. It depends on the strength and health of their body, their tissues, their immune system. The other thing, and this is also kind of a holistic natural medicine concept, is that what we refer to as infectious disease isn't always a disease. It is maybe a natural, healthy cleansing process that the body goes through as a means of clearing debris, of taking out the garbage, of spring cleaning your closets or garage. So this whole idea that all symptomatology is bad, is caused by a pathogen, and must be suppressed at all costs, has really done a lot of damage.
I agree. And so those symptoms could just be the same. You could have the same symptoms if you're detoxing compared to if you have a virus, and people will always call it a virus, right? Right. And is there a way to tell the difference between like just detoxing? Like I have detox symptoms, for example, there's not. Well, for me, sometimes I do know because when I get exposed to mold 3 to 5 days later, I will get sick and I'll get a specific rash on my body actually. And I can differentiate that from actually being sick with a virus. I know I'm detoxing from that mold exposure, but it's not that easy for most people. I happen to have this, superpower of getting a rash. But mostly people can't tell. And so they're always going to think it's a virus, right?
Right. That's true. That's true. And, we look for, like in your case, that was an exposure. You appear, from what you just said, to be susceptible to mold exposure. Not everybody is, and not everybody to the same extent. And so you've got a propensity that can be fixed in many cases to be reactive to mold toxins. Because it's really what the mold produces that is often the problem, not the mold itself, although that can...
Right, the mycotoxins.
So, yeah, exactly, mycotoxins. So it's this whole reductionist approach to disease, seeing the symptoms as enemy that must be eradicated, rather than symptoms as a teacher asking us to pay attention to something in our lifestyle or our diet or something. And again, particularly in childhood, this becomes very obvious that childhood rashes, which we normally label as measles or chickenpox, is not a bad thing. In Chinese medicine, we talk about detoxifying maternally transferred toxins in utero and in breast milk. That sometimes the rash is simply a detoxification event and also is an immune activating event, right? So you have this, if you get a new car, then, drive it cautiously while the car is breaking in. Or you go to the gym, you work out, you get stronger. Those are another perspective on a lot of these childhood illnesses. I believe, based on the research and just seeing a lot of kids over 36 years and having to, that kids need to get so-called sick when they're little. It's an immune event. It's an immune enhancing, activating, strengthening event, and it's in the literature too, folks. When we suppress childhood illnesses like basic normal things like chickenpox and measles, they're more likely to develop other diseases later in life. Whereas if they go through that natural cycle of whatever, I'm hesitant to call it an infection, but that rash, that 1 week rash, which is easily treated with vitamin A, in the case of measles, you're not suppressing it, you're just enhancing the immune response to it. That's the non-suppressive approach to pediatrics. The kids actually end up coming out better than they were before. And my kids went through the same thing. They got sick when they were little, especially my son. And then, it just worked itself out, and now he hardly gets sick at all. And when he does, it's kind of mild. So anyway, this is the part of the problem of reductionism is seeing everything as wrong.
Exactly. And I like this talk about rashes. I've learned two really big things about rashes in my life because I've had a lot, having been vaccine injured 30 years ago. One is that I tend to get a rash when things are draining down, and the rash will appear below the part of my body that's draining out. Which is why, like a cold, so-called cold, will end up in the lungs in the end of it because it just is coming down. Like if my head is detoxing, then the last thing that will be affected is my lungs. And I don't ever think that it's a virus attacking my lungs. It's just where I'm detoxing next because it's coming down. And the other thing about rashes that I've learned is that basically your skin is your third kidney. So if your organs of elimination, your liver and your kidneys are overwhelmed with too much detox, then your skin's going to get involved. And so the skin, in my worldview, is not necessarily indicative of an infection, but just an overwhelm of your organs of elimination. And I mean, I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Great point. Well, your timing is great. We just started teaching a brand new course in our school on skin rashes.
Oh, really?
And I just taught this last night.
My favorite topic.
I know, well done. March 25th. We have 2 more classes if folks want to join the course or get the recording. But it's exactly what we talked about last night, which is that we have 5 organs of elimination: liver, kidneys, colon, lungs, and skin. And if one of them is compromised, the others have to pick up the slack. And so a lot of what we call toxic skin conditions are often overspill or overflow from organs that are simply not able to cope with the toxic burden that's present.
I would have to agree with that based on my experience, not because I'm a medical doctor, obviously. So this is so interesting. So this whole terrain versus germ theory, I knew about it before we got locked down, but everything really came to a head when they announced that we had SARS-CoV-2, which are called COVID-19. And so I watched how they dealt with this. The Chinese scientists who in January 2020 supposedly isolated and purified the SARS-CoV-2 virus, they tossed out that sample so other researchers couldn't peer review it. And then they gave that to Drosten, who owned the journal that the original paper was published in, establishing the PCR test. And there's tons of problems with that paper. So can you talk to us about what you think is really going on with COVID?
Yeah, I mean, it was a psyop, obviously. Thanks to the work of David Martin, there's a patent trail that goes back 22 years, including a, quote, COVID-19 test that was patented in 2015. And the pronouncements of Fauci at Georgetown University in 2017, somehow prognosticating that there would be a major pandemic when there hadn't been one in 100 years. Suddenly there was going to be a new one, which he said with authority, there will be another pandemic in the next 2 years. That was 2017. Bill Gates, similar thing. All the usual genocidal, sociopaths. And so what happened was most of the problem pathogens, so-called, were engineered bioweapons. So Lyme disease, COVID. COVID started in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Peter Daszak, I believe, and then Obama banned gain-of-function testing. Fauci says no problem. Exported it. U.S. funded, transported that coronavirus bioweapon development to Wuhan, where it was completed and then released. And so the buildup to this was immense, and it was just one of the most brilliant psychological operations in history locking people down, keeping them in their homes, keeping them away from each other, preventing them from gathering, closing schools and churches, closing small businesses, and doing all kinds of measures that were, up until that time, considered completely absurd. Lockdowns and routine masking with cloth masks, distancing, all of this nonsense, preventatively, not people who were actively sick, but asymptomatic people. This was just a freak show. Like, this had never been done before because it's useless. And now we know in the big Johns Hopkins study, somehow they published this, a fact of truth or a bit of truth, is that all the lockdown measures did much more harm than good. And then make people super miserable and then present them with the only option to get back to normal, which was an experimental injection. And it was just brilliantly executed. And the amount of coercion and guilt and fear was just incredible and never before seen. And so there was something that was developed in a lab. All of the numbers were faked because they gave doctors and hospitals collectively billions of dollars to diagnose people as COVID cases and deaths, whether they were or not. And they juiced the numbers on cases, the permanent chyron at the bottom of the screen, cases and deaths. And, in the words of Dr. Lee Merritt, who's an orthopedic surgeon, she said this, COVID turned out to be a nothing burger. This was not a serious illness for most people. And the people who died were typically 80 years old or more, had 4 comorbidities of serious illness like diabetes and cardiovascular disease and asthma and such. And it was an incredible exercise in societal tolerance of finding out what people would go along with. And it was kind of messed up how much people went along with without saying boo or pushback. So it was a disaster. And now we have what's called long COVID, is really long vax, is vaccine injury. And we're seeing total catastrophe with conservative estimates of 17 million killed worldwide by the jab. And typically with vaccine stats, it's 100x that for those who were injured but not killed. So that's a lot of people. 17 million times 100, possibly maybe injured but not outright killed. Much more than the bioweapon did itself.
Exactly. What was your first tell, Dr. Gaeta, that there's something wrong with the COVID narrative? Were you hip to the idea of a Psyop before 2020? And so did you see signs early, or did you just see something that just woke you up and you said, oh man, there's something wrong here?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been speaking on vaccine issues, mostly with childhood vaccines, risks, dangers, lack of efficacy, for about 27 years nationally. And so I was immediately suspicious, automatically, having treated so many vaccine-injured kids in the clinic. I was immediately suspicious of how this thing was rolled out. And to go from claimed sequencing the genome to a shot in somebody's arm in 57 days, that's not possible. That reminded me of how a 1,700-page Patriot Act was delivered to Congress on September 12th, 2001, the day after 9/11, a 1,700-page bill was proposed.
Before we even had AI.
This was just sitting on the shelf. Anyway, that's another story.
They needed an excuse to roll that thing out.
Exactly. So, one of my favorite memes is the COVID was created for the vaccine. The vaccine was not created for COVID. So they created this whole, campaign to keep people isolated and afraid. Small businesses closed, Walmart's open, the liquor store's open, your church is closed. All of this type of stuff was really carefully designed. And the people at the street level, like the public health departments in your local county, they had no idea. They just, CDC said. But so they didn't really know what was going on. They were just executing directives and pretending that this was a good idea without actually thinking about it. So I started the podcast, actually, March 18th, 2020, just to teach people a few classes about how to have a healthy immune system. Because nobody knew what this thing was, most of us.
Let me just say that the 5 words that could start a fight with anybody in 2020 were, I have an immune system. So that was dangerous to teach people about that, Michael.
Absolutely. And we have Fauci on camera saying, if you've had the flu, you don't need a flu shot.
Right.
Because of natural immunity.
Right.
Natural immunity became a 4-letter word. It became an expletive. Again, all kinds of rationality just went out the window. Had lunch with Lee Merritt, and she was an orthopedic surgeon. She's like, her tell for her was the mask thing, because she was a surgeon for 25 years. She was in the OR thousands of times. She's like, we never use, this is not how you use a mask. And certainly not a cloth mask. She knew, and that's what put her on the map with you and I and those in the health freedom space. She became a hero because she was a surgeon calling out the bogus nonsense of universal masking. So I got wind of, it started to smell bad, so to speak, the spidey sense, when they started doing stupid things, the social distancing, the, walk into the restaurant with a mask, and then as soon as you sit down, you can take it off. And then, but if you're going to stand up again, you have to, it's like, what? I went to a comedy club in Denver, and they require, show me your papers, which is a vaccine card, which obviously I didn't have. And I was like, this doesn't smell right. And then the truth started to come out, hearing from folks like Lee Merritt. And then I had Paul Marik on my show, who had to watch 7 patients die because his hospital prohibited him from treating them. This has never happened before, where you tell doctors they can't try stuff to treat patients. That's when, and then the evidence just started to pile up. It was an avalanche of evidence that this was, unfortunately, a plandemic or a scamdemic that was all about exercising control over the population and shoving people into these experimental drugs, which were illegally required. Right in the U.S. federal code, it says anything approved under emergency or use authorization can never, under any circumstances, I'm paraphrasing, be mandated. You can't force somebody to take an experimental treatment. And that's what they were doing every day. Schools, colleges, comedy clubs, this is all illegal. But there was so little pushback because of the societal pressure, this tribal mentality. You are the enemy. I got yelled at by more than one Karen in the health food store. Put your damn mask on, as they're pushing their kid in the stroller. I'm like, and I go, I'm not going to lash out at a mom, but I was just, what's going on here? The amount of mass hysteria is insane. So I think the silver lining, Alex, because I try to, find the good in things and people, is that it woke a lot of people up. Like, this was all BS. This was all nonsense. This was all not okay. So that, if in the future this sort of thing gets pulled again, we're promised by Bill Gates that there'll be another pandemic, that people will be a little more suspicious, ask a little more questions, do a little more pushback, a little more civil disobedience against this sort of nonsense in the future.
Absolutely. So it looks like it might be happening again. Have you heard about this IEA energy lockdown playbook?
I heard of it.
Yeah. I haven't gone deeply into it either, but it seems like that could be the climate lockdown that everybody's been fearful about.
Yep.
COVID was just practice, and maybe this is the real thing.
It could be. And partly is they're on a timeline. I had Mickey Willis on the show, and I did it from his studio, actually. I was in Austin, Texas. And he said his opinion was, and I think there's something to this, nobody expected Trump to win. So they had a more gradual or a delay. They had a later planned rollout of SARS-CoV-2. And they had to push the schedule ahead of what they wanted because Trump won the election. So they had to accelerate the schedule, and it was not a fully baked cake.
Interesting. It sure didn't seem fully baked. So that does make sense.
I would agree. And I think it's something like this climate thing, Alex, that the the amount of evidence that this whole thing, the climate scam, is a scam. We're in our third year of global cooling. We're picking up 100 billion tons of extra Antarctic ice every year. Like, all the evidence is like this whole thing is a scam. And I think that the rate that people are waking up to it has accelerated, so that they might have to maybe do the same thing and rush out a fake Psyop situation before the critical mass is reached and nobody pays attention to the climate narrative ever again. I don't know, but that's what I'm guessing, because now, more people are waking up, more evidence is coming out, more scientists saying, yeah, this whole thing has been bogus for the last 30 years, that it's all about control and of the population and, social credit system and all of this. So if they do run a similar scam, I think that's probably why, is that they need to get ahead of the tipping point.
I think that's a really interesting comment, that it could be similar to rolling out the COVID narrative, because they didn't expect Trump to be in office. And now, because so many people are calling, crying wolf on the climate change agenda, that they have to get in under that before a critical mass of us don't believe it anymore. And, I have to say, there's a really interesting tie-in with you being in Boulder, because that's where my mother used to live. And she was actually an award-winning wind energy pioneer. And so that was really important work to me, because it was important to her. And it took me a very long time to understand that the climate agenda it's actually really an agenda designed to control us later, probably with climate social credit scores or carbon scores. And I think her work was great. And I think that we should all, I think the environment needs to be clean, just like our bodies need to be clean. But the climate change agenda it's been weaponized for sure.
Very much so.
So do you think COVID was, it was a Psyop, which you already said, but was it for population reduction, or was it a test for future population
control?
Not COVID,
control? No, it was too mild. The vast majority, everybody got so-called infected or exposed, is maybe a better word, and almost everybody that got, quote, sick recovered with mild to minimal symptoms. Like with every so-called infection or something, the people who got the most serious complications and death were already compromised, not with exceptions, but the average person already had 3.9 chronic comorbidities or other illnesses that they walked into this thing with already. And if you have cardiovascular disease, diabetes, asthma, metabolic syndrome, obesity, you're more likely to get sicker and deader with anything. So I think the thing that was the depopulation event, which I think, was more of a dud than they had hoped, was the vaccine, the so-called vaccine, the experimental genetic modification injections. That, I think, was what everything was geared towards. And, 5 billion people took at least one of these things, including 75-ish% of the U.S. population getting at least one. And, most of those getting at least two. So, and we saw the most deaths, again, all the numbers were cooked, but the most deaths where there was the most vaccination, like in the U.S., and the least deaths where they had the least vaccination, like in many countries in Africa, where they're like, we don't want this, because they had already been abused by the Gates Foundation, vaccine program. They're like, they're just distrustful of all injections, which kept them alive,
And they caught Gates trying to sterilize the women there.
They did.
And yeah.
They did.
So they knew. They knew.
Well, it's his family tradition. His dad ran a national abortion clinic chain. This whole, this is the thing. This is where it gets a little dark, Alex. And I'm sorry to say this, but I'm a very optimistic person, and as far as I'm concerned, God wins in the end. But people have the ability to make choices, which can make things pretty rough for other people. But this is where it gets dark, is that this anti-human agenda is pretty advanced. And so we have in the West this idea that human beings are a cancer on the planet, that the less human beings there are, the better, that the world is overpopulated, that there isn't enough to go around, that it's irresponsible to have kids given climate change, global warming, which is going to eradicate human life within 8 years, and that was 10 years ago. And all of this just devastating. It's just breaking the human spirit. Now, the West, especially in Europe, is in big trouble because people are not, all European countries, without exception, are well below, except maybe Poland and Hungary, are well below replacement rate of 2.1. Italy, the land of my ancestors, is around 1.2. So they're just killing themselves and replacing themselves with Muslims through open borders. Now, Poland is doing great. Hungary's doing great. Italy's turning around. Sweden's even turning around a little bit. But Europe is destroying itself by convincing European women that human beings are a cancer on the planet and it's irresponsible to have a kid because of climate change. And this is very bad news for Western civilization. So, this is, and it's just, so this whole, you take the COVID thing and the climate thing and the everything thing, and it all kind of, it's a little dark, but it kind of fits in this anti-human, almost demonic agenda, which is anti-life.
And it gets people to choose these things to reduce the population for themselves. Choose the vaccine. Choose to be transgender, and then you'll never have children the rest of your life. And it really is a depopulation agenda. And so it's a war without firing a bullet, right?
It is. And I have to say, having met, I'm in Boulder, so I've met a few of these folks who think this, and they really are sincerely convinced. They're not bad people, they really believe they're doing the right thing for the world. And, I was talking to a patient. She's like, oh, my daughter was thinking of having a baby, but with all that's going on with the climate, I talked her out of it. And I was like, oh my God, you don't want grandkids? I was like, oh. So, look, I let people make choices. I believe I'm a bit of a libertarian, but I'll do you, I'll do me. Let's just not interfere with each other and do things that are harmful to other people. But this is dark. I mean, a potential grandma talking her daughter out of having a kid because of climate. It's totally sad. So, thankfully, the folks who think that way are, self-selecting them into extinction, because they're not having babies. The people who are having babies are folks who are, a little more or less or more pro-human, pro-humanity, team humanity, and see through all the nonsense that human beings are a cancer on the planet that needs to be eliminated, and that, Georgia Guidestone style, we have to reduce the population to 500 million, and then everything will be okay because we'll be in balance with nature. All this kind of demonic anti-human stuff. The people who see through that are thankfully the folks who are having lots and lots of kids. But still, is it going to be enough? I don't know. But humanity is in an inflection point right now.
I couldn't agree more. It's actually absolutely terrifying. And so let's go back to the concept of informed consent.
Yes.
That was completely abolished when we were locked
Yeah.
down and COVID shots were forced on college
Absolutely.
students, schools, K through 12 students in some states like California, which we stopped. And of course,
Well done, you.
Thank
You
you.
are a rock star. I'm telling you.
Thanks.
California's lucky to have you.
thank you. I'm still fighting for our parental rights here because parents should always call the shots.
Well, thank you for doing that. And I do call it California
I know.
for that reason, because
Yeah.
medical freedom's just been eliminated.
Or we could call it Absurdistan. That's one of my nicknames for it.
Absurdistan. I like that better. It's a
Yeah.
little less aggressive. Yeah.
But,
I'm from New York, so I can kind of do the in-your-face thing sometimes.
We know so many of our listeners understand the relationship between health freedom and our personal and economic freedoms. It's the same principle. If you're one of our audience who's concerned about inflation, paper asset crises, and ongoing monetary crises, you may have already started accumulating gold and silver or are considering doing so. There's no gold dealer we know who's better positioned to serve the freedom community than Mish International in Menlo Park, California. I'm one of the many happy customers who's purchased gold or silver in their showroom, or I've had it delivered through their secure courier service. They are true veterans who are honest, fair, and reliable, and so knowledgeable regarding all the choices of gold and silver bars and coins to help you choose the products that fit your goals and your worldview. The principal, Robert Mish, is world-renowned for his expertise in rare coins as well. Write down this number, 650-324-9110. That's 650-324-9110. And visit mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com to learn more about this notable company. Do you ever wonder what my foundation, Free Now Foundation, really does? It turns out that after all the articles and videos that I do, that a lot of people still wonder what we really do. We're California's leading medical freedom nonprofit, but did you know we're the only group in California trying to end the medical mandates so children can go to school safely in California? And what does that mean? People don't get this, but it means there's no need for an exemption if there's no mandate. We won't need a religious exemption. We won't need a medical exemption. We won't need any type of exemptions anymore because parents will just be able to say no. No is a complete sentence. And Free Now Foundation is going to stay in the courts and do this legal strategy, pursue it as long as it takes until parents call the shots again in California and beyond, and parents can just say a simple no. So if you share this vision of a world where we don't have medical mandates, where children do not need an exemption of any sort to go to school, and this work calls to you, please consider supporting us at Free Now Foundation, freenowfoundation.org. That's spelled FREENOW foundation.org, and make a donation today. So our Bill of Rights was demolished. The informed consent was completely demolished. And even though, as you said earlier, informed consent was written into the EUA law, emergency use authorization law, I think it's 360 BBB in federal code, said that we were entitled to informed consent. But we've had informed consent law on the books for a long time, for decades now. And I know you know the history of it. So could you share the history of informed consent with people?
Yeah, it started with the Nuremberg doctors' trial in 1947, and the Nazi physicians were accused of doing experimentation on people against their will. And they were doing a lot of, at the time, very advanced genetic and other wacko sort of experiments from what I understand. I don't know all the details. But anyway, the Nuremberg doctors' trial, the principle of informed consent was born, which says that personal bodily autonomy, the right to control one's personal sphere, outweighs collective good. Meaning, you don't lose your right to choose what goes in your body, just to keep it simple, even if it's for the public good. And that no one can perform an experiment or procedure on you without two things: informed fully of potential risks and all intended benefits, and uncoerced consent. Now, informed consent has not existed for several decades in the field of childhood vaccines. There is coercion, pontificating, all this kind of pressure from an authority figure in a white coat with DR before their name, the pediatrician, the sales force for vaccines, and not so much the enforcers, that's the government. There hasn't been informed consent already, which has been, again, kind of dark, because that means if you're not in control of your personal bodily sphere or that of your child, then the person in charge of those things is the state. State in a generic term, whether it's the county health department, your state, your country, the federal government, whatever, that the state, to use it in sort of a socialist communist way, is in charge of your body and your kid's body. That's really what it means. You've handed over control of your child's body to the state. And so parents are already trained that this is okay. And so then COVID shows up, and you don't have a choice there either. If you're going to keep your job, stay in school, in my case, come into the comedy club, do anything, me going skiing. Oh, where's your card? Stay 6 feet apart, all this nonsense. To participate in society, you must show your papers. And so, this whole informed consent thing hasn't really been present in the vaccine field, what I call the vaccine cult, for decades. And I just had Paul Thomas on my show, who the medical mafia went after hard, just lying continuously, because he was insisting on informed consent in his practice. And, he came from, Oregonistan, and that's how it is there.
And vaccines are always the exception. There's always a double standard when it comes to vaccines. We saw that again and again with COVID. But so a patient's going to get informed consent, which I actually like to call informed choice, for every other medical procedure except vaccines. And vaccines have terrible side effects. The risk is actually super high that you're going to have some sort of injury, as Dr. Paul Thomas said on your show, from vaccines. And so, but people are being underinformed on purpose just to get them to have the shots. And it's awful. In California, Dr. Gaeta, the state is literally in charge of vaccination for children here. The pediatricians give it, and most parents will go and just ask for the vaccines. But the parents who want to get a medical exemption for their child who's been previously injured, or a sibling of a child who's been previously injured, they can't get it on their own. They have to find a California-based doctor to write a medical exemption. That goes into a database called CARE-ME, California Immunization Registry. And then that gets bumped up to the Department of Public Health. That's the state. And they blanket deny all the exemptions. And then the school goes into that database and looks it up and says, oh, your exemption isn't valid anymore. Your child can't go to school here. Your options are to leave the state, or one of you in this couple has to give up your job to homeschool your kids. I mean, it's a massive violation of due process and the 14th Amendment right to parent your minor. It's just the obliteration of choice.
Yeah, well said. Well said. It's the obliteration of choice. And, but that's what happens in all socialist, communist movements, is they promise everything and then deliver nothing. And what I mean here, and you know this better than anybody on the planet, in the roll up to that bill that you fought valiantly against, taking away all exemptions effectively to vaccines, they promised up and down, over and over again, any doctor that wants to write any exemptions will be hunky-dory. We will not go after doctors writing exemptions. There'll be no professional discipline. It's the doctor's choice if they want to write an exemption. So they lied. That's what communists do. They promised everything and then delivered misery, just like is happening in my old home city of New York, and with Mondami, another communist. So this is what they did. They just lied and said that medical exemption will be freely available without consequence. And of course, when it actually passed, then those doctors are in a bad way if they write blanket exemptions. And so, the two silver linings of all this, one is, it's not great for California, but a lot of folks have left over health freedom issues. Thankfully, folks like yourself are staying and fighting to change the tide, and it's happening. And the second thing that happened, and this is more of a COVID thing, is homeschooling. Millions of children left the school system entirely because of COVID, because they and the teachers' unions, more communists, fought bitterly against parents being able to listen in on their kids' lessons on Zoom or whatever, video lessons. And the teachers were basically trying to get the parents to agree to not be in the room. And enough parents were like, this is my kid. I'm going to hear what you're teaching them. Were completely appalled, and then pulled their kid out of school, never to return, which is great. So we have the highest percentage of homeschool kids. It's millions now, as a result of the COVID and the unintended consequence of seeing all the Marxist indoctrination of their kids that was happening without their knowledge. So anyway, I try to find the good in all these evil, nefarious things, and there's a lot of still evil, nefarious. but people are waking up.
They are. Well, and the Supreme Court is coming down on our side of parents needing to be involved in the education of their children. There's a case called Mirabelli, and then there's Mahmood versus Taylor that's really affirming parents' rights around what their kids can be taught in school.
Yes.
So it's actually really hopeful for our cases. They're going through the system right now for parental rights around medical choices. It very much relates. I really want to get into this topic of the fallacy of antibody titers and herd immunity. And I know you know a lot about this topic. So can you tell our audience about how vaccines are tested and how they determine if a vaccine is effective? And then talk to us a little bit about what antibodies actually mean.
Yeah. So in all 50 states, and this is, of course, counter to all knowledge of immunology, but in all 50 states, proof of immunity is an antibody, a positive, measurable antibody to that particular so-called pathogen. And this is based on a myth that immunity is limited to antibody production. Now, what we all learned in school was the old two-box model of the immune system. We have innate or cellular immunity, which we're born with, and this includes phagocytes, natural killer cells, mucus and mucous membranes, epithelial barriers, things like that. And that engages immediately. This is what keeps us safe from so-called infections hundreds of times a day, perhaps. And then we have the other box, which is the acquired or adaptive immunity, which is mostly about antibodies. There's actually 4 other areas of the immune system, if you really want to have a modern understanding, an up-to-date understanding of the immune system, acknowledges the other aspects of the immune system, which is the gut microbiome, the in-house immune system of the brain and the nervous system, the glial system, the interferon system, and the endocannabinoid neurotransmitter system. So the immune system is much more sophisticated than antibodies alone. But to sell vaccines, they train people to think that if you don't have an antibody, you're susceptible, and if you do have a measurable antibody, you're protected. That's complete nonsense, because even in fully vaccinated populations of kids with measurable antibodies, they still get outbreaks. You could have 100% compliance and still get outbreaks, and everybody has positive antibody titers. Why? Because in the pie, if you look at the immune system as a pie, a very small sliver of that pie, maybe 5%, I'm estimating, is antibodies. The other 95% has nothing to do with antibodies. It has to do with all those other things that I mentioned. So this gets us to one part of your question, which is a great question, is of efficacy. There's 2 kinds of efficacy. There's laboratory efficacy, which is the shell game that they rely on people being duped by, which is, ooh, look, we have antibodies, you're good. And so that's called laboratory efficacy. Measurable antibodies, and that's called a titer, which just means measuring anything in the blood. Compared to real world, or we might say clinical efficacy, which means are those who receive that treatment, in this case a vaccine, which is supposed to be preventative, do they do better than those who don't, which is real world or clinical efficacy. And they carefully avoid that because there is none. So that's part of the scam, is getting people, even immunologists, to believe that immunity equals antibodies, and let's ignore every other aspect of the immune system. So that's thing 1.
Yeah, and it's reductionist, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show. It's totally reductionist. So that's thing 1. So let's go to thing 2.
Herd immunity is real. It's a real thing. It was demonstrated between 1931 and 1934. A very clever public health physician scientist with the Public Health Service was looking at data and found that in this time period, and I believe it was Baltimore and Chicago and Buffalo or somewhere in New York, that when 60 to 70% of the population got the measles. Now, this is 30 years before the vaccine was even available. There was no measles vaccine until 1963, not widely used till 1968. So this is 30 years before that, no vaccine on the scene. And he found that actually on the low end, 48% of the people got the measles naturally, but more typically 60 to 70% of the population got natural wild measles, that the number of new cases plummeted. And that was a thing. And so he spent 3 years crunching data, went to these cities, what's going on, and developed this concept, which is accurate, of herd immunity, which at that time, the medical field thought that a vaccine immunity was the same as natural immunity.
Oh, they did?
Through natural exposure.
In the 30s and 40s?
Yeah, for decades.
Wow.
They taught in medical schools getting a vaccine is the same as getting the infection.
Just like formula is the same as breast milk.
Yes, just the same.
Same
Perfectly,
thing.
completely identical. Synthetic vitamins are the same as natural food supplements. All the same thing. So that was real with wild infections. And the reason was if enough people developed natural immunity, they were less likely to spread it and transmit it, if you follow that line of thinking. But there was just less circulating. And it was a real thing. Now, if you combine that with the myth that was taught for decades, that you only ever need to get one vaccine because one vaccine provides lifetime so-called immunity, just like a natural infection, then they made this chasm leap that a vaccine will produce herd immunity just the same as naturally acquired infection or naturally acquired exposure or running the course of an illness. And that's how it all started.
So wait, so the herd immunity leap was that they made an assumption that once you had the vaccine, it was the same as having a natural infection.
Yes.
And that the protection lasted for a lifetime. Therefore, vaccines could deliver herd immunity. But that's based on two fallacies.
Oh, yeah.
That's
sure.
Crazy. I didn't know that's
Yeah,
how
and
they
by the
made
way,
that leap.
what is a vaccine? Just to keep it simple, a vaccine is an artificial drug designed which provides temporary stimulation, typically 2 or 3 years, of antibody stimulation. And it's not even with the wild pathogen, right? So now we have what's called atypical measles because the wild type measles isn't around that much. Most of the new cases are vaccine strain measles, not all. And so it's not even the original so-called pathogen. It's a variant that is in the vaccine injection.
Right. So now you get into like current events. Measles is in the news and they're blaming the unvaccinated as usual. But is it the fault of the unvaccinated?
No.
Tell us why.
No, not at all. And again, this is where, and again, it's happened with COVID, but it's happened forever, is this difference between cases and deaths. And they juice the case numbers with everything, especially COVID, to gin up the fear. But keep this in mind, Alex. In 1962, the year before the measles vaccine was even introduced, every kid in America got the measles. 3.5 million kids, estimated by CDC, got the measles. Everybody got the measles. It was a Brady Bunch show, checking off, oh, you got your measles, you're done. And they were, actually. They're light and very unlikely to get it again. And it was the scoreboard, and Alice, the bookkeeper, housekeeper, checked it off. Oh, Marcia got it, yay. And it was like a cool thing. They got to stay home from school. It's a 1-week rash, who cares? And the mortality rate from the peak of measles deaths in 1915 to 1917 declined 99.48% per capita, meaning the number of cases skyrocketed to include basically every child in America, but the death rate was nearly zero. It's about 400 deaths per year, which sucks if that's your kid. But out of 3 million cases, that's a pretty low CFR, or case fatality rate. So then the vaccine comes out and cases plummet and they claimed victory. But the death rate didn't. The death rate continued its decline as it had been since 1917. So people get freaked about cases which are irrelevant in a 1 week rash, easily treated by vitamin A. That's in the literature. And don't keep their eye on the ball, which is how many kids are dying. And as Bobby Kennedy said on campaign trail, almost impossible for an illness to kill a child who is not severely malnourished. I'm paraphrasing. And we've known that forever. So that's why it was a big surprise when they started having to do boosters, meaning another vaccine after the first one. It was like, wait, what are you talking about? It's lifetime. Why are we giving a second one? Oh, because it doesn't protect you
And the
anymore.
booster is just a euphemism for doing it again. We got to vaccinate you again. There's nothing different about a booster. It's the same shot a second time, right?
Exactly. And now pertussis is up to 6 shots of DTaP.
But they're all called boosters.
It's insane. So anyway, that's what happened with herd immunity. It's a real thing, but only with naturally acquired infections and natural immunity. Does not apply to vaccines. And we know this because we have all the data. We have outbreaks, which nobody should be fussed about outbreaks. We should only be concerned with deaths, which are vanishingly rare. And usually when there are deaths, say with measles, it's not from measles, it's from a comorbidity, or iatrogenic, meaning caused by the hospital or treatment, death. We've seen this all over the place. The very few measles deaths we've had, if you analyze them carefully, they didn't die of the measles. They died of something else. They had several other conditions and were mistreated by the hospital. Something else happened. So the herd immunity is impossible with vaccines. And the two reasons are what we call primary failure, which is some people are so-called non-responders, 5 to 10% of anybody who gets any vaccine will never generate an antibody response. And then that's primary failure. And then you have secondary failure, which means the antibody stimulation, which is stupidly equated with immunity, wears off, typically in 2 to 3 years. Some last longer. In the case of pertussis, it lasts a couple of months. So, if they really wanted to keep pertussis titers up, you'd be getting your kid vaccinated every few months. There's a staggering failure of the pertussis vaccine. But again, it's whooping cough. So what? It's very treatable. And anyway, so the vaccines in general, bottom line, do much more harm than good. The sickest children in American history and world history, sickest children in the history of the planet are fully vaccinated American kids because we have the largest vaccine schedule in the world. The healthiest children in America, including my own, are completely unvaccinated kids, and kids in the middle are kind of sick. Vaccines, the childhood vaccine schedule is by far, it's not even close, the single greatest cause of childhood illness. Not my opinion. We have all the data, including this great book he was just on the show a couple of weeks ago, Brian Hooker for the 4th time. And what a great book. The sickest kids are the vaccinated kids. The Henry Ford study confirmed this. There's 120 studies. Now he's revising the book. It's going to be close to 200 studies confirming that fully vaccinated kids are the sickest kids around.
It's so true. I always wanted to do a film of a preschool where people would have to guess which kids are vaccinated and which are not based on how they behave and how they interact with kids and how easy they are if they're not vaccinated. And I went to a Weston A. Price Foundation conference recently, and Sally Fallon remarked, did you notice that none of the babies here are crying? Because a lot of people brought their kids and they weren't crying, they weren't fussy, they weren't throwing themselves on the floor. And she was right. I didn't see any kids like that there because none of them are vaccinated. So I'm going to end on a really difficult question because you're a systems thinker. And so we look at these measles cases that are in the news right now. And we know that when we introduced measles vaccine, that it also introduced some issues for people who got measles after they were vaccinated. There's pathogenic priming, there's encephalitis, which I don't think really existed at all or to the same extent that it does now before measles vaccination. So, and given waning immunity, the fact that we just cannot keep this immunity up to get to this goal of herd immunity, how would we back out of the measles vaccination program? Is that possible?
Well, the first thing to do is to separate them. It's not a controversial thing to do unless you're Merck, which makes MMR and MMRV. You can't get a measles vaccine on its own. And that was intentional to roll up 3-in-1, or these days sometimes 4-in-1. So the first step is to take away the fear. And that's the problem. And the guilt, right? So if you realize it's a 1-week rash treatable by vitamin A, and kids rarely, if ever, die of the measles, it's a 1-week rash that every kid got in the 50s and early 60s, then you start to unwind some of the fear. Because again, the vaccine program is not based on science. It's based on fear. And it's a cult. You know it's a cult because you're not allowed to question it. And if you question it, you're a bad person. If you don't participate, you're a bad person. That's how you know it's a cult. And Vaccines Amen, Aaron Siri, great book. And, so anyway, the first thing is to unpack some of the fear and let parents know it's nothing to be afraid of. Every kid in the country got it for decades with rare complications, if any, and it's treatable, not by suppressing it, but by enhancing immune response. And we do that with vitamin A and other things that are profoundly helpful for supporting the person or the child through the infection without suppressing it. This is what I call non-suppressive pediatrics. That's what I've been doing for 36 years. Non-suppressive pediatrics. You're not suppressing stuff with antibiotics and vaccines. You're aiding in the child's ability to move through that without complications.
Which takes us back to the detox conversation we had in the beginning. These are detoxification events, right?
Yep.
Mostly. Okay.
In many cases it is, for sure. So if we get kids well nourished, there's your Weston Price, approach that I've been advocating for decades. These kids rarely get sick at all. And if they do, it's mild and of no concern. And we look at unvaccinated populations in religious communities, and these kids are way stronger and healthier than their fully vaccinated counterparts. I had a very sad experience. I took my kids to social graces class, the cotillion, it's called.
Very important these days.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I teach them a lot, but I'm like, hey, did I miss anything? Here, let me throw them in this class. And of course, they resisted it, but I volunteered to be a chaperone on one of the evenings. And you dress up and show them manners and all of this. And it was, I almost started crying. I almost burst into tears. And and I'm not a, cryy kind of guy, but I shook every kid's hand and looked into their eyes. And there was nothing. There was these vacant stares. There was just the shine, the life, the spirit, the joy, the innocence. It was on almost all of them. These kids were just beat down by whether it's the vaccine schedule, whether it's the Marxist indoctrination. I don't know.
It wasn't just that they weren't taught to shake a hand firmly and look someone in the eye. It was way beyond that.
They were just all fearful. And, it was just, I looked in their eyes and I was like, where's the joie de vivre of childhood? Where is the joy, the exuberance of childhood, And they knew they were in a safe place. It wasn't like there was bombs going off. These were, well-dressed adults warmly greeting them with a smile. And this wasn't even their first night. This was like towards the end of their series of classes. It wasn't a safety thing. It was something else. And Rudolf Steiner talked about this. He said there'll be a vaccine that extinguishes the human spirit. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And he also talked about sickness, so-called infection, as a detoxification event in many cases anyway. And the so-called infection is evidence of detoxification, not the cause. Anyway, it's the cleanup crew in cases of bacteria, the bacteria multiplying to clean up all the debris that you let accumulate from your toxic lifestyle, in some cases at least. But anyway, that was very sad. And I'm like, wow, I got to do something more about this. I have to increase my efforts to educate parents on, what's going on.
Yeah, so is that where
you are doing.
Thank you. Is that where the hope is now, Dr. Gaeta?
It is. People are waking up. So there's two levels of hope. One is, the 30,000 foot level and really beyond, which is sort of God wins. The divinity, the cosmic, loving, divine intelligence in the universe, which we all came to reveal, always prevails in the end. And so that's big picture hope. Is I have more faith in that divine cosmic power than I have faith in the Gates Foundation, right? And
Wonder why.
and Pfizer, right? In
Yeah.
other words, I place because there's no such thing as a faithless person. Everybody has faith in something, but in most people it's misdirected. They have more faith in the world and dark forces or powers in the world than they do in something that is beyond the world or encompasses the world. So I have much more faith in that than in any of the so-called powers, principalities, dark forces that are very much at work in the world. So that's another layer of hope. And then the last bit is I have faith in people. People are waking up more every day. COVID accelerated that. All the data that's coming in about vaccines, everything that's coming out about COVID and how it came from a lab and we were all lied to and the vaccine was never safe and all of this. The truth is just coming out, and it's causing people who are willing to think, which isn't everybody, they're waking up. So more people are waking up, and that, that's, I'm very hopeful about that too. And parents are coming in with their kids to the practice here. They're in a different place than they were when I started practicing 36 years ago. They're much more asking questions, and some of it's like challenging me on stuff and pushing back on stuff. I was like, great, yay, just think for yourself. I ask my kids when they come home from school, what questions did you ask today? Right? I want them to ask questions, question authority, question me. My son, I say something, he's like, that doesn't make sense. I don't think you're right on that. I'm like, great, good. Even if he's wrong and I'm right, I don't care. He's asking, he's thinking. And that's the thing that I'm very hopeful about is more people are starting to wake up. Young people are waking up, right? We still have the woke leftists who are, kind of easily manipulated and, useful idiots, as the communists would call them. But you have a much larger group of young people who are waking up to the sanctity of life, to the importance of freedom and liberty, that we live in a great country, that we have to protect our freedoms, that it's one generation away at all times from being taken away. We saw that with COVID. Thank you, Alix. That I'm very hopeful for all of those reasons.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. So, Dr. Michael Gaeta, how can we support you and how can we find you?
Yeah, I have a clinic and a school. Most of my practice is virtual, so I have patients all over the world that I work with through phone and video at michaelgaeta.com. It's just myname.com. And then we have a school for holistic health and practitioner trainings in natural functional medicine. I've been teaching for 33 years, trained over 20,000 practitioners. And for me, it's a leveraged moment, just like your show is a leveraged moment. If I can train one practitioner to be a better practitioner, they're going to help thousands of people who I'm never going to meet. So I spend, I practice part-time on Tuesdays seeing patients virtually and here in the Boulder office. And then I spend most of my time on education of the public on the podcast every Monday live at 10 a.m. Pacific. And then through our school for holistic health, for anybody who wants to learn how to take care of themselves and their families better, and practitioners who want to improve their patient care to help co-create this new culture that's emerging of nature first, drugs last. And I'll give you the link. I'm writing a book on a very important herb, Chinese wormwood, Artemisia annua, the first herb to win a Nobel Prize, 2015, along with ivermectin. And I'll give you a link to that. I'd like to give folks, I'm in chapter 3, so I've finished the first 2 chapters, at least in draft form. So I'm happy to give that to your listeners. It's a very useful herb for the modern times with turbo cancers and all kinds of other things going on. So I'll give you the link where folks can get the first 2 chapters for free.
Because it's an antiparasitic. So those ivermectin and fenben and mebendazole protocols are also, they also work with natural antiparasitics. Imagine that.
They do.
Yes, nature first. Nature first.
And 2015 was the Nobel Prize in Medicine year of antiparasitics. Ivermectin won half the Nobel Prize. Chinese wormwood won the other half of the Nobel Prize,
I didn't know that.
which was remarkable. So I'm very excited. So I'll give that to your listeners, and if anybody, if you know anybody who's open to a natural approach to getting better, I'm happy to talk to folks and help them out. And I just have a huge amount of appreciation for you in a very challenging state when it comes to freedom. I just appreciate you and the Health Freedom Foundation for help giving people a way to participate in their future and in their children's future. It's so precious, the work that you're doing, and I want to support you in any way I can.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Michael Gaeta, those are some great concluding words. We at Free Now Foundation love the work we do, and we're going to keep doing it until parents call the shots again in California and beyond. And people like you are partners in this, and you're helping lead the way here. Thank you so much for being on the Alix Mayer Show. It's been a real pleasure, and I know people are going to learn so much from our talk today.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. We are so happy to have as our prime sponsor, Mish International, Northern California's acclaimed specialists in rare coins and gold and silver investments. Our friend and supporter, Robert Mish, is the same principal that started the company back in 1963, and he's still there every day with 63 years of experience. He has integrity, reliability, and fair pricing, whether you're buying or selling. When you have business to do with precious metals, you'll always be treated well at Mish International. Call 650-324-9110 and tell Robert that Alex sent you.